Absolutely. Another big change I did this semester is I shifted into using Poll Everywhere. So Mike knows that for years and years, I do participation activities in class. I was a huge believer in pen and paper and I'd pass out recycled paper. I'd ask people to draw, a quick diagram of the rock cycle or do a quick math problem and turn it in. And for me, there was power in the chaos that produced. So students would work as a group. They'd get right up against each other. They would write on those pieces of paper. I'd have 50 million pieces of paper, and I could quickly flip through them in the front of the class and see what concepts people were getting and they weren't getting. And then you started to see a whole variety of things like clickers and then apps like Top Hat and Poll Everywhere come in, and I'd really resisted using them. And I realized I'd resisted them primarily because I am not a big fan of multiple choice questions. I'm sure there are people who are much smarter than me at William & Mary who can ask them in such a way that they actually make students think, but I can't. And by and large, they always have a 25% chance of getting it right if it's a multiple choice quiz. I would much rather give them something that's more applied and see if they can come up with the answer. And so this summer, working with Steely, I was able to learn how to use Poll Everywhere, and I was surprised how much the students enjoyed it. They knew they were going to have one each day. Some of them, were very basic. Can you identify this dinosaur? Can you name this bone? Some sorts of things that they're going to see on the quizzes. Some of them are much more open-ended, not nearly as black and white. How would you interpret this? Do you agree with the author on this? And all of that seemed to keep the students engaged. They liked it a lot more than I thought. I have a memory of trying to use clickers where the entire class is pointing their clickers at me like I'm some kind of a television, and they're just like, they're pointing their clickers and answering a question. I feel like an old-fashioned TV. With Poll Everywhere, I felt like I was able to do something a little bit more intellectual with them, and the answers were fascinating. They were all over the place, some really phenomenally creative answers in that. So that was a bonus. You can't do pen and paper on Zoom. You can't do pen and paper in a socially distanced classroom. So Poll Everywhere, it was a tough first week, but we got there and, we figured it out. And by the end of the semester, they were super quick and super confident with Poll Everywhere.
Now, you haven't gamified the Poll Everywhere where you have like a leaderboard yet, have you?
I've used the leaderboard in the few examples where I tried to do multiple choice or a word cloud. I do that, but a lot of the stuff is open-ended. Right. And so I can see their answers, but I don't have it up on the screen for everybody to.
It might be fun to have like the daily leaderboard question,
sure.
And then have that open-ended.
Yeah, and I've seen folks do that as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'd be interested if you do try that, how it works. But you would be one person who I think it might be worthwhile to. Yeah,
I will say there were a number of technical issues that I experienced this semester.
Yeah, we want to hear about that.
Yeah, one of the issues I will say is that so I was primarily using Zoom, Blackboard, and Poll Everywhere, and PowerPoint, and Panopto. And what I found is that the different applications update at different times. So I would have a Zoom update that would then break down the connectivity with these other apps, or we would have a Poll Everywhere app update. Poll Everywhere must have updated 2 weeks ago because I can't use it in my PowerPoint in Sadler Center anymore. So things like that just kept the semester. I felt like there were technical issues almost every day, and they were different almost every day. And so that in and of itself is just exhausting. I will say, so this semester I was teaching in a non-teaching space, and it was fascinating to see the difference that made. But what it meant is that when I went into the Chesapeake room in Sadler each Monday, Wednesday, Friday to teach, I quickly learned that I had to show up 15 minutes early and then 30 minutes early. And then by the end of the semester, it was an hour early because I would get there and sometimes the room had just been torn to shreds. The chairs were everywhere. Everything was unplugged. Someone stole a 30-yard extension cord. Who does that? Someone stole a microphone. Who does that? People unplugged every possible combination of things that you can unplug was unplugged in that room. And because it wasn't a teaching space, it wasn't being, or I assume it wasn't being monitored regularly. And so the first few weeks were this just avalanche of trying to call IT, and it's much harder and it takes longer for them to come over now. They did their best. Trying to call AV in the Sadler Center, and that was hysterical because the lead AV person's only on campus like 2 days a week. And so it was inevitably someone on the phone with this person. By the end of the semester, I feel like I know how to troubleshoot at least 30 different issues in that room. I can do all kinds of things with the lights. I can handle the power. I can handle the dehumidifier. I can do part of the sound system. In the middle of a quiz, 4 weeks in, someone started lecturing on American democracy in the back of the room. And I was like, who's talking during the quiz? So I go back there and the TA is looking around and we were picking up the wireless mic from someone who wasn't even in the building. There was no one teaching about democracy in the building, yet there was a full-on volume lecture going on during my quiz. So I learned how to cope with that. And the sheer variety of issues and the fact that in these non-teaching spaces, you're often on your own, that was absolutely exhausting. And I realized there were a couple of times, like there was one day where we didn't get it fixed before class started. So the first 10 minutes of class, I'm up there tap dancing, interpretive dancing, trying to keep students online long enough to get it fixed. The rest of the time was a mad scramble in that 1 hour trying to get everything fixed. And then at the end of that hour, you're exhausted and then you have to start your lecture. And so there were literally times where I was just, it was challenging, definitely challenging.
And I would ask if there was any coping mechanism that you had for that. I don't know how do you deal with that, right?
Diet Coke. No, I mean I did go out and do some deep breathing exercises. My TAs were again incredibly helpful. So we would walk in and I would first start testing things and then I would send them, Terry, can you please run down to AV and let them know the mic is missing? Or can you run down and let them know that the speakers aren't on? Or, Mackenzie, can you call classroom support and let them know that the bulb is out in the projector?
Yeah, and you don't often have it's lucky that you had the opportunity to get there so early. It's unfortunate that you had to do that.
And there were a couple days where there was a class ahead of me, and that of course was truly nerve-wracking. But it is.
But at least then things are working.
No, because I had two times where the person before me had tried to get things set up and they couldn't, so they just gave up. And then they left the room, and I said, "Wait, was the projector working?" And they said, "I'm never teaching here again. I give up," and they just left.
Wow.
So it was.
That was a particularly hard space last semester. I had lots of issues with that particular space in the Sadler Center.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I feel like I've got it down now. And so part of what I mentioned to Mark Hofer is that I really think there would be value in someone. I don't know if it's classroom support or IT or Steely, but someone talking to the people who have taught in these spaces and writing all of this down and then giving it to the people who are teaching next semester.
Passing it on in terms of like either a handout or something. We have a tremendous amount
of information that honestly, with all due respect, I don't think anybody has. I don't think classroom support knows how to work the lights, the dehumidifier, the wireless mic, right? And I don't think Sadler AV knows how to work the Wacom, the hover cam, and so on. And so there's knowledge there, and I would hate to see it just filter away and see everyone have to reinvent the wheel next semester when they teach in those same spaces. Honestly, I'm really happy I had the opportunity to teach in Chesapeake. I was supposed to be in Trinkle Hall. Chesapeake was definitely a step up. I'm really glad I had that opportunity, but it was a steep learning curve.
Wow. Jacob, do you have something to ask as a student from a student perspective?
I guess as a student, I was interested to hear you talk about how you used to have like a few big tests throughout the semester, and you decided to change that to be like smaller, more like bite-sized quizzes. And to me, hearing that, it sounded like something I would prefer as a student, even during a normal semester. Are there things about the way you've changed your curriculum or the way that you teach your class that you think you might carry over into post-COVID times?
Yeah, that's such an excellent question. The quizzes are an interesting phenomenon because instead of having sort of 3 exams, I had 6 quizzes, and the quizzes were all shorter. So I feel like there was a limited number of things I could do and ask in the quizzes. So the quizzes, I think, were really helpful during pandemic, but they were also very limiting. It was limiting in what I could ask the students to apply or to think about. So I'll have to think about whether I would want to continue that sort of post-COVID. There were definitely things about being much more explicit about the schedule of the class and when everything was due. I'll definitely continue doing that. I think recording lectures. I never understood as a student why someone would want to record a lecture. Listening to a lecture was not something that I personally would have found useful, but the numbers of my students that listened to lectures, and it could be twice, 3 times, 4 times before quizzes, is astounding to me. And the feedback on being able to do that's been really positive. So that's something that I'd like to continue doing moving forward. As a teacher, it's really easy to fall into that trap of thinking that students are like you and that what you like, your students are going to like. And so this semester is a really good reminder that, first of all, every student is different. And then every person is dealing with COVID in a different way. And so if recording lectures makes someone's life easier, I'm all over it. That's been incredibly positive response.
So about those 6 quizzes instead of 3 exams, did students, because you said that some students felt, I guess last semester, that there was more work. Did any students feel that 6 is more than 3 and therefore I have to study more? Because I would have been like that. Because I liked a midterm and a final, and I like to forget about the class.
Well, I think, Mike, you and I went to college in a really, really different time. I look back and, the midterm was 40% of my grade, the final was 60%, and that was it, right? And so I think the population that we're teaching now is really different than it was when we were in college, and the expectations are different. With the quizzes, I offered 6, and I dropped the 2 lowest. And so what that meant was that some students simply chose not to take some of the quizzes, and that's completely fine with me. And so I think if I had required all 6, they would have felt like it was more of a workload, but because I dropped the 2 lowest, and because they were only 20 minutes, I think they, at least the feedback that I got was pretty positive.
Okay, that's an important difference. Yeah, I think that's an important thing to add. That makes a lot of sense.